The November sun was beginning to set over south-central Los Angeles, painting the sky with orange tones that contrasted dramatically with the harshness of the streets below. Marcus "Tank" Williams, 28 years old, was sitting on the porch of a small house in Compton, watching children play on the street where he had grown up, the same street where he had committed his first crimes. 3 months had passed since Marcus decided to leave the East Side Crips, the gang that had been his family for more than a decade. It wasn't an easy decision. In fact, it was the most difficult of his life. But one night, when he was at the hospital visiting his 16-year-old cousin who had been shot in a territorial war, something inside him broke definitively. "Tank, you need to stop this, Junior," his cousin had whispered with tubes coming out of his chest. "I don't want to end up like you." Those words echoed in Marcus's mind for weeks. Junior had always idolized him, always wanted to follow in his footsteps. Seeing the boy there, fighting for his life because of a war he didn't even know why it was happening, was the moment of clarity Marcus needed. Marcus had joined the gang at 15, right after his father's death in a work accident. His mother, devastated by the loss, began working 3 jobs to keep the house, leaving Marcus practically raising himself on the streets. The gang offered what he needed most at that moment: belonging, protection, and a distorted father figure in the older leaders. For 13 years, Marcus lived that life. He started as a soldier, doing small services, evolved to drug trafficking, and eventually became one of the group's most respected and feared lieutenants. He had money, respect on the streets, and power. But he also had something that weighed increasingly on his conscience: blood on his hands. Now, sitting on that porch, Marcus held a crumpled photo he had carried in his wallet for years. It was an image of him at 12 years old, smiling next to his mother and Junior during a family barbecue. He barely recognized himself in that innocent boy full of dreams. "Mom always said I could be anything," he murmured to himself, gently touching the woman's face in the photo. His mother had died of cancer 2 years before, and one of his greatest pains was knowing she died worried about the path he had chosen. In the last 3 months, Marcus had tried to find legitimate employment, but it was difficult. Very difficult. His tattoos told his story: tears on his face, gang symbols, bullet scars. Each job interview ended the same way: looks of fear, polite excuses, and doors closing. "Sorry, we're not hiring right now. You don't have the experience we're looking for. We'll be in touch." But they never were. Marcus had gotten a small job at a laundromat, earning minimum wage folding clothes. It was humiliating for someone who used to control entire drug corners, but it was honest. It was a start. However, the money barely covered the rent of his small apartment, and the temptations of his former life always lurked around corners. That specific afternoon, while walking back from work, Marcus passed by a vintage record store. In the window, there was a poster of Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style album. He stopped and stared for a few minutes, remembering how that music had been the soundtrack of his adolescence. Snoop had always been different for Marcus. It wasn't just the music, it was the story. Snoop came from the same streets, had faced similar problems, but managed to transform his life and become something greater. More importantly, Snoop always talked about redemption, about second chances, about the possibility of change. Marcus entered the store and bought the used CD for $5, money he should have saved for food. Getting home, he put the album on and sat on the floor of his almost empty apartment. As the songs played, he began to remember when he had dreams. Before the gang, before the violence, he wanted to be a mechanic. He loved cars, loved understanding how things worked. Maybe it's not too late yet, he thought. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. He wasn't religious, never had been, but he was desperate. He needed guidance. He needed hope. He needed someone who understood his journey and could show that change was possible. "God, if you're there," he said quietly in the darkness of his room, "help me find a way. Help me be the man my mother wanted me to be." It was at that moment that a crazy idea began to form in his mind. What if he tried to contact Snoop Dogg? What if he told his story to someone who would really understand? It seemed impossible, improbable, almost ridiculous. But Marcus had reached the point where impossible seemed to be his only option. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. He would find a way to talk to Snoop Dogg. He didn't know how, didn't know if it would work, but he knew he had to try. It was his last hope that real change was possible. While preparing for another day at the laundromat, Marcus looked in the mirror and made a promise to himself. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to prove I can change. For me, for Junior, and for my mother's memory. He didn't know yet, but that desperate decision would be the first step of a journey that would change not only his life, but the lives of many other people. Marcus spent the next few days consumed by a mission that seemed impossible, finding a way to contact Snoop Dogg. He had no connections in the music industry, didn't know anyone famous, and his experience with social media was limited. But the determination he felt was different from anything he'd experienced before. During his lunch break at the laundromat, Marcus went to a nearby internet cafe, a small, poorly lit place frequented mainly by people who couldn't afford internet. At home, he paid $2 for an hour of access and began his research. First, he tried the obvious channels. He looked for Snoop's official profiles on social media and sent direct messages. He knew millions of people probably did the same every day, but he tried anyway. He wrote and rewrote his message dozens of times. Mr. Snoop Dogg, my name is Marcus Williams. I'm from Compton and I'm trying to change my life. I left a gang 3 months ago and need guidance. You've always talked about second chances. Could you help me? The messages disappeared into the digital void, without response. Marcus tried to find the official website, looked for a manager or agent's address, but everything seemed protected by layers of assistance and filters. He didn't have money to hire a lawyer or advisor who could help him navigate these barriers. Frustrated but not defeated, Marcus decided to try a different approach. He began researching Snoop's life, his current projects, places where he might appear. He discovered that Snoop had a studio in West Hollywood, that he frequented certain restaurants, that he sometimes appeared at community events. During the weekend, Marcus took 2 buses to get to the studio. He stayed outside for hours, waiting, watching, trying to gather courage to approach security. But every time he saw the guards, big men, professionals, clearly trained to keep people like him away, his confidence diminished. "Can I help you?" asked one of the security guards, approaching Marcus after seeing him walking in circles on the sidewalk for 2 hours. I wanted to talk to Snoop Dogg," Marcus stammered, immediately feeling ridiculous. The guard looked at him with a mixture of skepticism and pity. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, sir, but it's important. It's about changing life, about second chances." "Look, man," said the guard, not unkindly. "You seem like a good person, but we get hundreds of people like you every week. Everyone has a story, everyone needs help. That's not how things work." Marcus knew the man was right, but the rejection still hurt. He went home that day feeling more lost than before. On Monday, back at work, Marcus was folding clothes when his supervisor, Mr. Johnson, 55-year-old black man who had hired Marcus despite his tattoos, approached. "Marcus, can I talk to you?" "Sure, Mr. Johnson. Did I do something wrong?" No. Actually, you've been one of the best employees I've ever had. Always punctual, hardworking, respectful." Mr. Johnson paused, studying Marcus's face. "But I can see you're struggling with something. Want to talk?" Marcus hesitated. He had learned on the streets not to trust easily, not to show vulnerability. But something about Mr. Johnson, perhaps the genuine kindness in his eyes, made him lower his guard. "I'm trying to restart my life, Mr. Johnson. I left a bad life behind, but it's difficult. No one gives a real chance to people like me." Mr. Johnson nodded understandingly. "What was your previous life?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Gang. East Side Crips. 13 years. Most people would have stepped away at that moment. But Mr. Johnson just nodded again. "And what made you want to change?" Marcus told about Junior, about his mother, about the realization that he was trapped in a cycle of violence that led nowhere. Mr. Johnson listened in silence, nodding occasionally. "You know," said Mr. Johnson finally, "my brother went through something similar 20 years ago. He managed to get out, rebuild his life. It wasn't easy, but it was possible." "How did he do it?" "He found a mentor, Someone who had walked the same path and managed to get out. Someone who could show that change was real. Mr. Johnson paused. Do you have someone like that? I'm trying to find one, Marcus admitted. Actually, I'm trying to contact Snoop Dogg. I know it sounds crazy, but he's always talked about redemption. To Marcus's surprise, Mr. Johnson didn't laugh. Instead, his eyes lit up with interest. Snoop Dogg, huh? You know, my daughter works in the entertainment industry. She's a production assistant at a studio in Hollywood. I can't guarantee anything, but I can ask if she knows someone who knows someone. Marcus felt his heart race. Mr. Johnson, that would be incredible. Like I said, I can't promise anything, but people deserve second chances, especially people who are genuinely fighting to change. Mr. Johnson put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Keep working hard, keep being honest, and let's see what we can do. That night, Marcus went home with more hope than he had felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, the universe was conspiring to help him. Maybe his journey of redemption was really possible. He turned on the Snoop CD again, and, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to believe that the future could be different from the past. 3 days passed without news from Mr. Johnson about his daughter. Marcus tried to maintain hope, but with each passing day, the possibility seemed more distant. He continued his work at the laundromat, keeping his head down and trying not to think about the old temptations that always seemed to be waiting on the neighborhood corners. It was a Thursday afternoon when Mr. Johnson called him to his small office at the back of the laundromat. His face was hard to read, and Marcus felt his stomach sink, preparing for yet another rejection. Marcus, sit down, said Mr. Johnson, gesturing to a folding chair in front of his cluttered desk. Any news about your daughter? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Johnson smiled for the first time since Marcus had known him. Well, my daughter Keisha talked to some people, and those people talked to other people. You know how Hollywood is. It's all about who you know. Marcus nodded, his heart beating faster. It turns out that one of the producers who works at the same studio as Keisha is the cousin of someone who works with Snoop Dogg. Not directly, but at the same company. Mr. Johnson paused, seeing the anxiety on Marcus's face. They're willing to pass your story along, but with one condition. Any condition, Marcus said immediately. You need to write a letter, a real letter, by hand, telling your complete story, your life in the gang, why you want to change, what you hope to achieve. It needs to be honest, direct, and from the heart. Marcus felt a mixture of hope and terror. Exposing his life this way, putting his mistakes and fears on paper, was frightening. But if this was what he needed to do... I can do that, he said with determination. There's one more thing, Mr. Johnson continued. They want you to include references. People who can speak about your change, about your current character. I already said I could be one of those references. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. Mr. Johnson, why are you doing this for me? The older man leaned back in his chair. Like I said, my brother went through this. No one deserves to be trapped in the past forever, especially when they're genuinely fighting to change. That night, Marcus bought a pad of paper and a pen and sat at the kitchen table of his small apartment. Starting was the hardest part. How do you summarize a lifetime of mistakes in a few pages? How do you explain decisions that now seem incomprehensible even to yourself? He started at the beginning. Dear Mr. Snoop Dogg, my name is Marcus Williams, but on the streets they know me as Tank. I'm 28 years old and I'm from Compton. I'm writing this letter because you're the only person I can think of who might understand my journey and can help me find a way forward. I joined the East Side Crips when I was 15 years old. Marcus wrote for hours. He told about his father's death, about feeling lost and alone. He described his first crimes, how violence became normal, how he rose in the gang hierarchy. He didn't try to justify himself or minimize his mistakes. Instead, he was brutally honest about the choices he had made and the consequences they had. He wrote about Junior in the hospital, about his mother's death, about the realization that he was wasting the life she had given him. He described the last 3 months, the difficulty of finding work, the loneliness of having left the only family he knew, but also the peace he felt from not having blood on his hands. I'm not looking for money or fame, he wrote on the last page. I'm looking for guidance, For someone who can show me that real change is possible. Your songs have always talked about overcoming adversity, about transforming your life. You did it. I know I can too. But I need help finding the way. Marcus finished the letter at 3 a.m. He read and reread it several times, correcting grammar errors and adding details he had forgotten. In the end, it was 4 pages of his life in careful handwriting. His confession, his plea for help, his promise that he was really trying to change. The next day, he gave the letter to Mr. Johnson, along with a thank you note for his daughter Keisha. Mr. Johnson promised to send it through the channels they had discovered. "Now we wait," said Mr. Johnson. "And keep working, keep proving. You are who you say you are." Marcus nodded. He had done his part. He had opened up completely, had put his story in the hands of the universe. Now all that remained was to wait and continue living each day, trying to be better than the previous one. 2 weeks passed without response. Marcus began to accept that maybe his letter had gotten lost in the pile of thousands of others, or that maybe Snoop was simply too busy to care about the story of yet another ex-gangster trying to change his life. But then, on a Tuesday that started like any other, the laundromat phone rang. "Johnson's Laundromat," Mr. Johnson answered. Marcus was folding sheets near the phone when he saw his boss's expression change. His eyes widened, and he looked directly at Marcus. "Yes, he's here," said Mr. Johnson slowly. "Yes, I can call him." Mr. Johnson covered the phone's mouthpiece and whispered to Marcus, "It's for you. It's someone from Snoop Dogg's office." Marcus felt his legs go weak. With trembling hands, he took the phone. "Hello? Marcus Williams?" said a professional female voice. "Yes, that's me. My name is Sarah. I'm Calvin Broaddus's personal assistant. He read your letter." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "And he would like to talk to you." Marcus could barely sleep the night before the meeting. Sarah had scheduled for him to go to Snoop's studio on Friday afternoon. "Be punctual," she had said, "and be yourself. Calvin appreciates honesty, above all else." On Friday morning, Marcus asked for the day off from Mr. Johnson, who not only agreed but also lent him a clean, pressed dress shirt. "You'll do well, son," said the older man. "Remember, you deserve to be there." Marcus arrived at the studio in West Hollywood an hour before the scheduled time. He was nervous on the sidewalk, mentally rehearsing everything he wanted to say. At exactly 2 o'clock, he presented himself at the reception. "Marcus Williams," he said to the receptionist. "I have an appointment with Mr. Broaddus." "Of course, he's expecting you," she replied with a professional smile. "Sarah will come get you in a few minutes." Marcus sat in the waiting area, trying to calm his nerves. The walls were decorated with gold records, photos of Snoop with various celebrities, and posters from his movies and TV shows. It was surreal to think that in a few minutes he would be talking to the person who had inspired so many of his favorite songs. "Marcus?" An elegant woman of about 40 years approached. "I'm Sarah. Calvin is ready to see you." They walked down a hallway lined with more musical memorabilia until they reached a double door. Sarah knocked lightly and opened it. "Calvin, this is Marcus." The studio was smaller and more cozy than Marcus had imagined. There were leather sofas, recording equipment, and the familiar aroma of incense in the air. Snoop Dogg was sitting in an armchair, wearing casual clothes, jeans and a simple t-shirt. He seemed taller and thinner in person, but his eyes had the same intensity that Marcus recognized from music videos. "Marcus," said Snoop, standing up and extending his hand. "Thanks for coming, man." "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Dogg," Marcus replied, shaking hands firmly but not too hard. "You can call me Calvin. Sit down, let's talk." Marcus sat on the edge of the sofa, still nervous. Snoop leaned back in his chair and studied him for a moment. "I read your letter 3 times, Snoop said finally. "It was one of the most honest things I've ever read. You didn't try to play victim, didn't try to justify the bad things you did. You just told your story." "It's the only story I have to tell," Marcus replied. "And it's a story I know well," Snoop continued. "You know, I grew up on the same streets. I had friends in gangs, saw what that life does to people. The difference is, I was lucky. Music saved me before I went too deep." Marcus nodded, feeling a connection he didn't expect. But you, Snoop pointed to Marcus, you were deep and managed to get out on your own. That's harder than what I did. I don't feel like I got out, Marcus admitted. I feel like I'm in the middle of the road, not knowing where to go. Snoop smiled. That's exactly where you should be. Questioning, seeking direction. The person who writes a letter like yours isn't lost. They're searching. They talked for 2 hours. Snoop asked questions about Marcus's life in the gang, about his family, about his plans for the future. Marcus was honest about everything. His financial difficulties, his frustrated attempts to find better employment, his concerns about returning to his former life. Do you want to stay at the laundromat? Asked Snoop. It's honest work, Marcus replied. But no, it's not where I want to stay. I always liked cars, mechanics. I thought about maybe trying a technical school, but I don't have money for that. Snoop nodded thoughtfully. What if I told you I know some people who run vocational training programs? Programs specifically for people with a past like yours. Marcus felt a spark of hope. That would be incredible. But here's the thing, Snoop leaned forward. I can open doors, I can make introductions, I can give recommendations. But the hard part, doing the work, proving you've changed, building a new life, that's on you. I understand, Marcus said. I'm not looking for shortcuts. I just want a chance. A chance is all any of us need, Snoop replied. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. I have a friend who runs an automotive training program in Carson. It's aimed specifically at people who want a second chance. The program is free but intensive. 6 months, full-time. Marcus felt his heart race. That would be perfect. There's more, Snoop continued. I'm also going to connect you with a mentor, someone who walked the same path as you and built a stable life. And if you complete the program and show you're really committed, I can help you find work afterward. Marcus fought back tears. Why? Why would you do all this for me? Snoop was quiet for a moment, looking out the studio window. Because someone did it for me once. And because your letter reminded me of who I was before all this fame. You reminded me of the importance of reaching out to people who are where I once was. How can I pay you back? By finishing the program, building a life your mother would be proud of. And when you're stable, helping the next guy who's where you are now. 3 days later, Marcus started the automotive training program. It was intensive and challenging, but for the first time in years, he woke up every day with purpose. His mentor, a man named David who had left the Bloods 10 years earlier, became not just a guide, but a genuine friend. 6 months later, Marcus graduated at the top of his class. Snoop was present at the graduation ceremony, proudly watching as Marcus received his certificate. How do you feel? Snoop asked after the ceremony. Like it's the first day of the rest of my life, Marcus replied. 1 year after that first conversation in the studio, Marcus was working as a lead mechanic at a respected shop in Inglewood. He had saved enough money to move to a better apartment and was taking night classes to eventually open his own shop. But perhaps more importantly, he had become a mentor for other young people trying to leave gang life. Once a week, he visited community centers and told his story, always ending with the same message Snoop had given him. You can change. It's not easy, but it's possible. Junior, who had fully recovered from his injuries, was now in college studying engineering. He often told friends he wanted to be like his cousin Marcus, someone who had transformed his life and now helped others do the same. On a Sunday afternoon, Marcus was in his shop working on a personal project when his phone rang. It was Snoop. Hey Marcus, how's it going? Very well, Calvin. Thanks for asking. Listen, I'm organizing a fundraising event for violence prevention programs. Would you like to speak to the audience? Tell your story? Marcus smiled. A year ago, the idea of speaking in public would have terrified him. Now, he saw it as an opportunity to give back. It would be an honor, he said. Perfect. And Marcus? Yes? Your mother would be proud. As Marcus hung up the phone, he looked around his shop, a space he had built with honest work and determination. On the walls, there were photos of his family, certificates from his courses, and a single photo of him with Snoop on his graduation day. He had come a long way since that desperate day when he decided to write a letter to someone he didn't even know would respond. But the journey hadn't ended. In fact, he was just beginning to understand that his true mission in life was to help others find the same path of redemption he had discovered. Marcus Williams had finally become the man his mother always knew he could be. And it all started with a letter, a chance, and someone who believed that second chances were possible for everyone.